What's going on, guys? Okay, so as many of you know, out there in the landscape of nutrition and fitness, there is just a ton of misinformation and stigma and dogma. And one of my biggest missions is just to provide a voice of reason and to sift through that stuff and to provide truthful, realistic, actionable information to you guys. So, on most things, I'm kind of in the center. I'm usually in the belief of, if information is falling on an extreme end of the spectrum, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. But in this video, I want to go into a topic that I am very passionate about, and I have been sort of fighting a war against this for as long as I've been in the game, and I'm sure it's a war that I'm going to have to continue to fight. But I just want to try to get this information out there, and that is the topic of carbohydrates. So when people ask me, hey, what are some of the big, misconceptions and false narratives and pieces of misinformation in the nutrition and fitness world, the one that always jumps to mind for me, and I think it's one of the most egregious and most common because it affects so many people and it makes a big impact, is going to be this narrative that carbohydrates are bad, right? This narrative that carbs make you fat. And in this video, I'm going to dive into why I think that narrative exists in the first place, why I think it's so common. I'm going to dive into why I strongly disagree with that narrative. I'm going to dive into why I think anyone interested in physique enhancement, fitness, performance should build a diet that favors carbohydrates and gets away from fat. I am much more in favor of a higher carb, lower fat approach. So we're going to get into all of that. Now, before I do, this is a topic that ruffles my feathers. So I'm going to throw down a double shot of espresso. If there's any coffee or espresso connoisseurs watching this video, drop a comment. Then I'm also just going to pop in a Zin, and we are ready to dive in. Okay, so first and foremost, one point I want to make up front is I've got no bias in this. I've got no dog in this fight. I have utilized low carb diets myself. I have utilized basically every form of dieting that exists out there. I have tried it on myself. I have tried it with clients. I have researched it. I am not tied to any one methodology. My mind is always open to being changed. All I care about is finding out what works, what's most effective. And for different people, different diet approaches may work better than others. So I'm not just on some hill that I'm dying on where I've just got this biased belief, carbs are good, fats are bad. It's not like that. I just, through years and years and years of experiments on myself, of educational, academic research, of anecdotal research, of working with hundreds of clients and athletes, observing people at the highest levels, observing people at just your typical general population levels. And through those years, I have really just come to this conclusion and honed in on this philosophy that I'm going to dive into now. So it's no secret that there is this very common narrative out there that carbohydrates are bad, that if you want to lose body fat, you need to go low carb, that if you're eating a bunch of carbs, it's a recipe for getting fat, that you can't eat carbs in the evening, right? You can't eat carbs after 6 p.m. or whatever it is. Oh, you want to lose some weight? Just cut back on your carbs. Why does this narrative exist? Number one, I think the popularization of certain fad diets, fad low carb diets, really kind of sparked this whole thing. And you can date it all the way back kind of to the 90s with the Atkins diet, which was, a species basically of a keto diet. It wasn't called that back then, but it was a low carb diet. Then you get into, more the 2000s, and you've got the popularity of the keto diet. And then you get more into the 2020s, and you have the popularization of the carnivore diet. All of these diets are low carb, high fat approaches. And I think because these got popular, a lot of people gravitated towards these diets and they start getting a lot of mainstream attention. I think that sort of started to perpetuate this whole, oh, low carb is the way to go. And, so many people are familiar with the names keto and Atkins and carnivore, and they know their low carb approaches. They don't necessarily know anything beyond that. And I've talked on this point before. A lot of people who subscribe to diets like that are doing so not because they truly believe the methodology is superior, but because they want to be part of this group identity. They want to be part of that diet that has a name and be on the Facebook groups and the message boards and be a part of something bigger than themselves. But, people who don't follow these diets, they see the people who do, and they kind of view them as like, oh, those are like the big fitness health nuts, right? Oh, if those people are going low carb, surely low carb is the way to go if you're somebody who wants to get a six pack and all those things. So I think that started to perpetuate this whole thing. And then building off of that, I think most people who say things like, oh, carbs are bad, don't eat carbs after 6 p.m., you want to lose fat, reduce your carbs, they're just kind of regurgitating and parroting things that they hear all over the place. And they've never actually researched it. They've not looked deeper. They've not actually explored that. They just kind of take it at face value and they hear it and they accept it. And then they start to repeat that over and over. So I think most people who are just saying this stuff just don't really know what they're talking about. And I don't mean that condescendingly. I just mean, I think most people just don't really actually take the time to look into these sorts of things. They just kind of accept it and then regurgitate it. Now, the third thing, actually, I should touch on this point as well. I think another point of kind of hysteria and fear mongering over the carb thing is this whole insulin is bad situation, which this could be a whole other video in itself. And I'll get more into why insulin is not the enemy later in this video when I get into kind of why I think carbohydrate-based diets are the way to go. But long story short, a lot of people, they associate carbs with insulin. They associate insulin with getting fat. And it's just that simple connection right then and there, end of conversation. But the thing that I think is a big issue here with driving this narrative and why people kind of buy into this whole carbs make you fat thing is that a lot of people are incorrectly identifying certain foods and certain diets as a high carb diet, when in reality, what they're looking at is a diet that is both high in carbs and even higher in fat. Now, no matter if you are in the carbs are bad camp, you're in the go low fat camp, I think we can all agree the best way to get fat is to have a combination of both carbs and fats at a high level in a big calorie surplus, right? Combine them both in excess amounts. No matter what side of this argument you're on, we're getting kind of the worst of all worlds here. And unfortunately, that's how most people are eating, and they don't realize it. They're eating a big combination of carbs and fats, and they look at the foods and they think carbs, and they aren't aware of all the fat in it. And an analogy I like to use all the time is the Costco blueberry muffin. Now, lots of people shop at Costco. I use the Costco example. It's a common brand. You can easily look up the macros online. But most people would look at a blueberry muffin and they think, quintessential carbohydrate, right? It's basically sugar bread. Well, you look at a blueberry muffin and there are actually significantly more calories in a blueberry muffin from fat than there are calories from carbohydrates. Because in a blueberry muffin, baked into it are oils and butter and eggs and other ingredients containing fat. The Costco blueberry muffin has something in the ballpark of like 70 grams of carbs, but then like 38 grams of fat. Within a single gram of carbohydrates, there's 4 calories. Within a single gram of fat, there are 9 calories. So a single gram of fat is over double the caloric density of a gram of carbohydrates. So you do the math there, 38 grams of fat versus 70 grams of carbs, and there's significantly more calories in the blueberry muffin coming from fat. Now, a blueberry muffin is just this perfect example of both the high carb and the high fats, just this dense little ball of tons of calories. Okay, which is why when people are eating diets built around foods like this, that is why people have trouble with their weight. They have trouble losing weight. And when they eliminate foods like that, they start to lose weight. But in their mind, they're thinking, oh, I eliminated carbs. And it's like, no, no, no. You actually eliminated a lot of calories, mostly in the form of dietary fat. And the blueberry muffin is just one example. I mean, how many other foods do people label as carbs when in reality they're much more fats? Pizza and donuts, even things like granola. You go to a restaurant, get a big pasta dish. It's cooked in oil. You've got the cream sauce, which is loaded up with fat. Most of the carbohydrate dishes and meals and diets people are eating are loaded with calories from fat in it. So again, when people eliminate the food, the pizza, the donuts, the the pasta, they stop going to the restaurants where everything's cooked in oils and butters. Suddenly they get this big drop off in calories. Again, most of those calories are coming from dietary fat, and then they start to lose weight, they start to lose fat, and they're like, oh, I cut out carbs. Carbs must be the reason why I was fat in the first place, right? So that is, in my opinion, one of the big drivers of sort of this narrative and misconception around carbohydrates. Okay, so why then do I think a diet biased towards carbs is going to be superior? And I'm not going to go into in-depth biochemistry on this. I want to kind of keep this simplified and actionable for people. The simplest way to put this is, and let's kind of move protein out of this conversation. That's another video, that's another conversation. But let's assume, for the sake of this argument, that we're keeping protein high. Protein is established. I think most people are going to agree, anyone concerned with fitness and performance, any topic relevant to somebody watching a video like this is going to agree that, okay, a higher protein intake is probably the way to go. Now we can talk about how much protein is really necessary. Again, that's another video for another time. But for now, let's set protein aside and just focus on the remaining calories in your diets coming from either fats or carbohydrates. So when I'm building a diet for anyone concerned with performance or physique, fitness in general, I am going to steer most of those calories, other than protein, towards carbohydrates. Why? The most simple way to put it is carbohydrates are our body's primary preferential fuel source. So when you just kind of think about it simply, it's like, hey, I've got my protein set, I've got all these remaining calories in my diet. Whether I want to gain weight, whether I want to lose weight, I've got this kind of remaining calorie allotment left. Where should I distribute these? Well, I've got these two macronutrients to choose from. I've got the carbs, I've got the fats. One of these options is like our main fuel source. So inherently knowing that, it's like, doesn't it make more sense to kind of build more of our allotted calories around this thing that's our fuel source? Because we're exercising, we're training, we need fuel for that. And the carbohydrates are providing that primary fuel. The other thing about carbohydrates is they just simply have a much harder time from a physiological standpoint being stored in the body as body fat. When you're an individual who's active and exercises, your body has a much higher chance of utilizing carbohydrates as fuel or storing carbohydrates as potential fuel in the form of muscle glycogen. Whereas with dietary fat on a physiological level has a much higher and easier chance being stored in the body as body fat. It's literally in the name, fat. Dietary fat, you eat that in a surplus, much higher chance of being stored as body fat. Why? Because it's not our body's preferential primary fuel source. Okay, you eat a big, huge bolus of fat before you're going to the gym. You're not using that as your glucose. You're not storing that as glycogen. Most likely, it's being stored as body fat. And then again, we get back to this whole caloric density thing. Again, way more calories in a single gram of fat than there are in a gram of carbohydrates. So when it comes to some diet strategies, let's say for somebody who wants to lose weight, well, for building a diet around carbohydrates, we can easily build really high volume meals that are low in calories. So one point I want to make is when we're kind of looking at food selections with carbohydrates, some people will hear this, oh, you're building a diet around carbs, so what, you're going to be, eating candy and sugar and all that. And that's such, this cop out straw man of the argument. Of course, we could build a high carb, low fat diet technically around Skittles and candy and sugar and juice and things like that. Nobody's suggesting that. I'm certainly not suggesting that. Okay, that would be the equivalent of someone advocating for a low carb, high fat approach, and then the people arguing against that being like, oh, so what? You're just going to eat, sticks of butter and blocks of cheese all day? It's like, no, that's very poor straw manning of the argument. So when it comes to, hey, how are we building this diet around carbs in terms of food selections? Well, we want to go with low fat carb options. And we want to go with foods that I would categorize as kill it, pick it, grow it foods. So I've talked on this point before, when in doubt, when it comes to choosing your specific food selections, think to yourself, can I kill this? Can I hunt this? Can I grow it in the ground? Can I pick it out of a tree? If the answer to that question is yes, it's probably a good bet as a food to add into your diet. So, what are kill it, pick it, grow it carbohydrate examples? Well, we're thinking white rice and sweet potatoes and russet potatoes and berries and fruit and black beans and even oatmeal, corn, things like that. These are all kill it, pick it, grow it carbohydrates, right? There's no Pop Tart tree out there. You're not growing Skittles in the ground. You're not, um, the point is, if you're choosing your foods, building your carb selections around kill it, pick it, grow it foods, they are inherently going to be low in fat and they're inherently going to be lower in sugar. And again, these are going to be higher in volume. Imagine eating a big plate of rice or a big plate of potatoes. We can easily put in 2 cups of white rice and just loads up a plate. And, we pair that with, some berries and some potatoes. And we might only have like 400 calories, 500 calories on that plate, but it is a huge plate. That is going to be incredibly filling. It is very hard to overeat in that manner. It's very hard to overeat rice and potatoes and oatmeal and berries compared to if you were to put the equivalent calorie load from fats on a plate, butters, cheeses, oils, things like that, nuts, peanut butter. I mean, that big plate of rice shrinks down to a food portion the size of your palm, and you've got just as many calories coming from fat. So on a just strategic level, much, much harder to overeat carbohydrates, assuming we're kind of going with those kill it, pick it, grow it carbohydrates versus when you're eating fats, which are going to be just way more calorically dense and way easier to overeat and accidentally overeat yourself into a surplus. But again, the big thing is the carbohydrates can be used as a fuel source. They can be stored as glycogen, whereas dietary fat is just going to have a much easier chance being stored as body fat, and it's just way easier to overeat. Now, one point here that I definitely need to make, and I think this is key, is we need to have exercise in the equation, right? When it comes to our fitness, our body composition, our performance, it's a two-sided coin. It's not just as simple as the diet itself. The other side of that coin, right? We've got our calories in, we got our calories out. Well, the calories out part has got to be a major focus of this equation. And that's going to be your exercise, whether that's lifting weights, whether that's running, whether that's playing basketball, whether that's just doing tons of walking or zone 2 cardio or whatever it is. Anyone who's interested in fitness and performance and physique enhancement, I don't think it's a very controversial statement to make that you should be putting a premium on your exercise as well, which is important when it comes to your ability to beneficially leverage and utilize carbohydrates. Like if I was just committed to a sedentary lifestyle, that's all I wanted to do. Hey, I just want to live a life of leisure where I just kind of sit in the house and shoot videos like this and don't do anything physically active. I'm not worried about being strong or fast. I'm not worried about how my abs look or anything like that. If that was me, I would be following some version of a low carb approach, right? Again, the carbs are going to be the fuel. Well, if we're not driving the car anywhere, we don't need to put gas in the tank. Okay. But if we're going to put gas in the tank, well, let's take the car out for a spin and use some of that gas. So again, it is key that we have exercise intact here. And the more physical output you have, the better you can utilize carbohydrates, the more you can use carbs as a weapon. And as you get stronger, you increase your volume, you increase your physical output, you can start to utilize more and more and more carbohydrates beneficially. And those carbs, those extra carbs are going towards fueling your training and fueling your recovery. It's a scientific fact that when you have full saturated glycogen stores, your muscle bellies are full of carbs, your force output is going to be higher. Okay. And if your force output's higher in the gym, that means you're getting a better training stimulus. You're burning more calories. You're building more muscle. As you build more muscle has a higher demand for carbohydrates. You're growing the size of your gas tank, which means you can put more gas in the tank and your body's going to use it. So now we're training our metabolism. Now our body's getting into this rhythm where it's getting better and better at utilizing the food we're eating, utilizing it beneficially, utilizing it with purpose, as opposed to it just sitting in your body and being stored as body fat. We're not getting those same benefits with dietary fat. If we have a diet that's built around primarily fat intake, we are not eliciting any of these benefits. We're not growing the gas tank. Okay, we're not just driving further output into our training and further recovery and further stimulus, all of these things. So again, leveraging carbohydrates necessitates also leveraging exercise. And again, the more physical output, the more carbs we can use. The bigger you get in terms of muscle, the stronger you get, the faster you get. Okay, the more gas you got to put in the gas tank, the more food you can eat. And that's going to be in the form of carbohydrates. So, when it comes to, okay, we're going to build this diet around carbs, we got to exercise, got it. What does that look like for most people? And this is going to vary from person to person. I'm not suggesting here that everyone is going to eat, 1,000 grams of carbs daily. Now, for a guy like me, I'm 6'7". I'm over 300 pounds. I'm lean. I'm carrying a lot of muscle mass. I'm training my butt off. Okay. I'm walking 10,000 steps a day. I'm lifting hard in the weight room and pushing with intensity. I'm doing zone 2 cardio after training. My carbohydrate demands, my capacity to handle and utilize carbohydrates is very, very high compared to your average human being. So I may be eating 1,000 grams of carbs on a big training day. Okay, but your person who's 100 pounds lighter than me, 200 pounds, well, their carbohydrate intake might be half of what I'm eating. And this is where it comes into the art of coaching and just, food journaling. And I've got other videos out there and more coming about kind of really setting up your specific calorie intake, your specific macro intake, all that. So it's going to be all individual. One simple piece of advice in terms of leveraging carbs in your diet is a simple way to start is just putting your carbohydrate intake around your training, around your exercise. Carbs are the fuel. Let's consolidate most of our fuel around the training window. So I like to get the majority of my carbohydrates in my pre-workout meal, intra-workout. I put out a video about intra-workout nutrition where I'll be consuming liquid carbs during my training session, giving me this ongoing stream of fuel as I'm training. And then I'll have a bunch of carbs in my post-workout meal. Now, again, going back to the insulin point from earlier in this conversation, this is where insulin becomes a weapon, where insulin becomes our friend. So insulin is a storage hormone. When we eat carbohydrates, our body releases insulin, and the insulin then starts shuttling nutrients into muscle cells and other places. But whatever you've been consuming, carbohydrates, which are, appear in the bloodstream in the form of glucose, aminos coming from the proteins you've been eating, dietary fat, when the insulin gets released, it starts latching onto these nutrients and shuttling them into storage. So if you're consuming carbohydrates around training, insulin spikes and it starts shuttling those carbs into your muscles, which is exactly where we want them. Now, if you're eating a ton of fat also, well, insulin is also going to start storing that fat. And what does fat have a good chance of being stored as? Body fat. Whereas carbohydrates, when insulin gets released and you're exercising, has a much better chance of being stored as glycogen and then being burned as fuel. But remember, the insulin's also shuttling in those aminos. So we're eating protein and we're training and we eat the carbs and insulin spikes and starts shuttling everything into the muscle. It's shuttling those amino acids into the muscle, which is exactly where we want them when it comes to building muscle and recovering. We want our protein to be shuttled into the muscle cells, which is where insulin plays a really beneficial role. I mean, you'll hear about bodybuilders literally injecting insulin like a PED, leveraging it to build muscle. That's because that storage hormone is just pushing all these beneficial nutrients, the carbs as glycogen into muscle cells, the aminos getting pushed into the muscle, going towards muscle building. And insulin is anti-catabolic. So catabolic meaning muscle breakdown. Well, around the training window, we eat a bunch of carbs, insulin gets spiked. A spike in insulin basically shuts off the catabolic mechanisms. Basically, throughout the day, our body's kind of either in muscle protein breakdown or muscle protein synthesis. muscle protein breakdown being kind of that catabolic end of the spectrum. Well, when insulin's released, that catabolic muscle protein breakdown part of the equation kind of gets shut down. Okay. Our body goes into storage mode, intake mode, not breakdown mode. And we want that to happen around training. We don't want our body breaking down muscle tissue. We want it shuttling and storing things when we're trying to recover and fuel ourselves. So having an insulin spike, an anti-catabolic insulin spike that's shuttling all these beneficial nutrients into our muscles around training, that's a good thing. We're weaponizing insulin. Insulin can be our best friend when it comes to performance and building muscle and recovering. But it just gets demonized as this thing that, oh, insulin is just going to make you fat. Well, if you're triggering insulin spikes just all day, you're eating in a surplus, you're eating both a bunch of carbs and a bunch of fats, and now all those fats are being shuttled into your fat cells by the insulin. Well, yeah, of course, you're going to get fat that way. But when you're exercising, when you're eating kill it, pick it, grow it carbs, when you're keeping your fats low, that is how we make insulin our friend. That is how we make carbohydrates our friend. Okay, this is why I like building diets that are built primarily around carbohydrates and lower in fat. So anyway, guys, I hope this gave some good insight into the topic. It's a controversial one. Doubtlessly, there will be people in the comments, arguing with me about blood sugar and insulin. And here's a little tidbit for you. You want to improve your insulin sensitivity. You want to improve your blood sugar metrics. You don't necessarily have to do that by reducing carbohydrates. Lose body fat. What's a great way to lose body fat? Reduce your calorie intake by reducing your dietary fat intake. Increase your protein intake. Leverage your carbs around training. Train hard. Train effectively. Your body's going to get better at utilizing those carbohydrates. Your body's going to increase its metabolism. It's going to build more muscle. It's going to start losing body fat. As all those processes start moving forward, you're going to get leaner. Blood sugar metrics are all going to improve. So anyway, guys, I hope this video was insightful. If you're finding the content valuable, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, help me grow this channel. I'm only going to be putting out more and more content. The more this channel grows, the higher ability I have to bring on better guests onto the podcast, the more ability I have just to upgrade everything I'm doing. And that's all I care about. I want to just be a good voice in this industry, put out great content, put out great information. If you guys want to see more of me, you can check out my resources on my website, hammerchiselperformance.com. You can find my ebook, which goes in depth on building your own diet to accommodate any goal. You can find my one-on-one coaching services there. You can find my training programs, my training community, Team Hammer and Chisel. It's a $28 a month membership, or you get to receive ongoing weekly programming from me. You can follow me on Instagram and stay tuned for episodes of the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast dropping here on YouTube and on Spotify every Tuesday. And again, guys, stay tuned. I'm only getting started with all the content I'm going to be putting out. We're going to be going more into training and lots more on nutrition. So guys, stay tuned. And I appreciate your support as always. Catch you guys in the next video.